Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to what will be our last episode of this podcast for a while, Drinking to Shape. And let's treat this one as the Christmas special, because as you can probably see, we've got a special guest joining us today, and it's Emma. Emma from Cambridge. Emma, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people what your job title is there and what it is that you do for a living?
I will do that to save you the embarrassment of pronouncing my surname, Mark. So I'm Emma Salgard Cunha, and I'm based over at Cambridge Enterprise. I'm the project lead for Arts, Humanities and Social Science commercialisation there. So I am a team of one at the moment at Cambridge, luckily well supported by all the other teams who tolerate me and allow me to do my stuff with the Arts, Humanities and Social Science researchers that we work with.
Cool. So this podcast is about what's different, and Emma's already started on that, because what are you drinking, Emma?
I'm despite the fact I was told to bring beer, I am in fact drinking aloe vera, which I've become addicted to whilst living in Scandinavia.
Well, to be fair, it's very hot today. It's about 30 degrees here where I am, and probably is where you are as well. Anyway, so I'm drinking. I never know how to pronounce the first one there, but it's from the Schlenkerla brewery in Bamberg in Germany. It is a Rauch beer, so it's a smoked beer, and it's actually quite a Christmassy beer. So that's what causes this to be the Christmas special. Chris, what are you drinking?
Yeah, so I'm drinking a Siren Piha Pils NZ Pilsner. So there's a New Zealand angle basically to this beer, but I'm sure it's brewed in Hackney, so that's fine.
Cool. So everything that we've been doing so far, I mean, obviously Chris and I have been talking from the Oxford perspective, and we've tried to bring in other perspectives as well. But it's far better to actually get somebody else in to talk about how things are different, because the solutions that we've come up with have worked in the environment that we work in. And you have a lot of flexibility on how you can support commercialization in social sciences, humanities, and the arts. And so I thought I'd ask you, Emma, I mean, how did you get started, and what were your early wins, and what were the first things that got you going, and what built up the framework that you've got in Cambridge?
Yeah, so I arrived at Cambridge Enterprise knowing really very little about commercialisation. So Cambridge Enterprise is quite big, I guess, probably OUI similar. So there's about 80 people at Cambridge Enterprise, and they were already actually doing quite a lot of arts, humanities and social science stuff, but they weren't exactly badging it in that way. It was really a call from the board. There was a kind of review of what we were doing, and a kind of area was highlighted that we're not really engaging that much with the arts, humanities and social sciences. A little bit in consultancy. So we've got quite a good consultancy services offering, and we've got some really kind of loyal academics as well who work with us time and time again in consultancy, especially in the social sciences. But across in technology transfer and in life sciences, and actually in our CPUNS team, it was a little bit more hit and miss. And so I guess that somebody in the higher echelons decided that a solution to this would be to bring in a literary historian. So that's my academic background, and I've been working in knowledge exchange after doing a postdoc actually in Oxford for a little while, and then I came back into Cambridge and sort of stepped into this world of technology transfer. And it was a good start. I think that I had probably the best job in Cambridge Enterprise because I wasn't attached to anybody. I was allowed to float around, and there were it wasn't sort of like a sort of predisposed ideas about what exactly this new thing was going to be. So I knew that I needed to get out and talk to a lot of researchers in my own schools, luckily, that I knew quite well. So in the arts, humanities and social sciences, so that's 2 schools of the universities divided into 6. So I knew I wanted to get out and talk to some researchers and find out kind of where commercialization might fit in with what they were doing. And I also knew that I needed to kind of observe what Cambridge Enterprise was already doing, and see where the kind of pinch points might be for my researchers. So the first 18 months was just literally doing that, just listening and wandering around and trying to understand what technology transfer is all about, which is quite a hard thing to absorb. And then more recently, we decided, this is something that we really need a bit more of an operational focus on. So the last 2 years has been much more focused on, okay, let's get this sort of pipeline of new projects together and start to think a little bit more systematically about what we're going to do with them and how we're going to get them out into the world.
Cool. So what does what if you've got a few projects, just describe where are they coming from and what do they feel like, you know?
Yeah. So one thing that was really interesting to me is that I think that the diversity of the kind of disciplines is really high. So you never know if you're going to get something which is about like social science intervention in North Africa, or it's going to be about education, or it's going to be a software project, or it's actually going to be like a consumer product sometimes out of our like art and design and architecture kind of departments. So like in terms of kind of diversity that way, it's you never know what's coming. But actually there are some kind of categories of particular kinds of projects. So I would say one is like a social intervention. And quite early on, I had a conversation with somebody who was like, we always use the word invention in technology transfer, but I think intervention is going to be your word because you're using it all the time. So that could be like a bit of like a kind of educational intervention, something that's quite concrete, a bit of copyright in that kind of tech transfer language, but sometimes it can be a kind of philosophy or an idea or a practice. The social sciences methodology is absolutely crucial, process is absolutely crucial for social science research. So social interventions, and then what do you do with them? Is this something that can be kind of detached from the academic and licensed? Is it something that's going to go on to be maybe more like a social enterprise? Can it be productized in some other way? I think that's been an important category. And then there is a lot of kind of copyright licensing, so media, games, even things like videos, training courses. So yeah, copyright and know-how licensing. And then probably the third really big category is software. So Cambridge has got a good tradition in digital humanities, so loads and loads of really strong, interesting research coming out of digital humanities, and also in NLP and computational linguistics. So both of those coming out of the social sciences and the arts and humanities, producing novel, cool software that actually in some cases you don't know what the application is going to be. So more traditional tech transfer around those, like trying to work out what is this, how can we build on it, who wants this, and sometimes that goes in a spin out direction as well. Yeah.
And Emma, because it's always good, I think, for listeners to have a concrete example, could you talk us through one of the spin outs that you've had?
Yeah, so I could talk about Versed AI, which is like kind of a favorite just because it was just starting to get going when I arrived at Cambridge Enterprise. So Versed AI is a spin out from our modern and medieval languages and linguistics department. So the academic Simon Baker, he's an expert in computational linguistics, and he was collaborating with another academic in the computer lab. And they came up with a software algorithm that basically allows you to read risk in supply chain networks. So when this came in, actually, it felt kind of niche, no longer niche in the new world. So there's different kinds of risk in your supply chain if you're a big company. So maybe you want to kind of source parts for an engine or something like this. So there's obviously like the risk that, you know, you might not have a lorry driver, or you might get stopped at customs. There's also like the risk of modern slavery in your supply chain, which can be a huge reputational and kind of legislative risk, as well as just not what you want if you're you know, the kind of company that we all want to be working for. And so how is it that you can read that? So what this software does is it reads all kinds of open source information like news articles, and it tries to map out where your areas of risk are. And the other thing that it can do is it can identify when perhaps there might be a particular pressure point where several of your different components, you might be sourcing them from different suppliers, but actually all of those suppliers are coming down to one node on the network themselves. So it helps you to kind of manage those risks. So this software, he managed to get this excellent fellowship, which specifically supported entrepreneurial work and to develop the product, and also sort of drew on the university's strategic relationships with a couple of big partners who had interests in data and supply chains. And from that, we invested first £20,000. It won our postdoc business plan competition, which is kind of training competition, which gave them another 20. And then it just started to fly very, very quickly. And yeah, now they're recruiting, which is so amazing to see when if you go on LinkedIn, check out Versed AI, you know, they're recruiting in all areas. They're going to need an HR department. They're really flying.
Wow.
putting it to good
Oh,
use. Yeah.
Oh, it's satisfying, isn't it? I have to admit, when you go into those spin outs and you actually go into the companies and you see people working there, it's just it just gives you that feeling of satisfaction, because even if you've played a small part, you just say, yeah, I've played a small part in getting that one going. So you've got spin out. So do you do licenses? Because one of the things that Chris and I find is that we don't really do very many. I mean, we keep on ending up creating ventures all the time, and we're trying to work out whether it's by accident or design.
Yeah, so I think we're a little bit, I mean, first of all, to say that I think we're a little bit kind of chronologically behind you guys. I think that you were putting real emphasis on this a couple of years ahead of where we were. So probably the deal flow is just a bit stronger, which is why you feel like you're churning them out left, right, and center. But actually, I think licensing, we see this as being a real interesting area, and an area that could be strong, especially for software, for example. So at the moment, I'm working with a really talented academic in architecture who has like a predictive architectural design algorithm. And I mean, there are options. We could try and turn that into a company, a kind of B2B or B2C model. But actually, there are also already really big players who produce software and have already got their software into the hands of the people that we really want to get this to, which is essentially architects or homeowners. And so kind of going back to existing partners and people that we've already licensed to, and trying to understand where could this fit into the portfolio, that's been important for us. So we're kind of got our fingers crossed now that will be under options soon. And I think it depends a little bit on the motivation of the academic as well. So is the academic wanting to be a kind of entrepreneurial founder, or actually is the academic wanting to build collaborative research relationships, in which case a license can be a fantastic tool for developing a really ongoing relationship with the university. So yeah, we try to kind of keep an open mind about that. And the other thing I mentioned, kind of media stuff, we've got quite a lot of games and things like that. So we've got this great video game, Dish Life, for example, that was designed collaboratively, and we ended up licensing it to our collaborative partner. So, you know, there's a kind of model there that really, I think it builds on the kind of knowledge exchange work that's already happening in the arts and humanities, where you've got perhaps a creative partner and an academic, perhaps a commercial partner as well, who are all bringing their different angles onto developing whatever product or idea this is, and then one of those partners has the capacity to go forward and license. So yeah, we do have that.
So I mean, one of the things, so this is great. I mean, because the media assets, that's definitely something that I think certainly I've struggled with. I don't know if you have, Chris. I mean, particularly with the film industry. I mean, we have academics making films in Oxford, right? And the issue we found, or I found, with licensing in that area was that our standard conditions that we have on warranties and liabilities and things like that, and how that isn't the industry standard in the film industry is that now you give the liability on the copyright, right? And the only formula I can come up with in order to make that work is to form a spin-out, because that's where you put all the warranties and liabilities, right? But that's the formula, but it's very theoretical, because people have gone, well, I don't want to make a spin-out just to license a film. So I mean, but you've not come across those sorts of problems? I
mean, I guess we're not quite, certainly we've never licensed anything into the film industry, although it has the kind of thing that I've been asked. Also, people wanting to license their podcasts, great idea for you. So it's not something that I've particularly encountered, but definitely the idea that I mean, I think this is a challenge in all areas of technology transfer. What are the actual expectations of the partner? What are the industry norms? And having to, so for example, I have a really interesting peacekeeping intervention, which we cherish and love, which came out of PhD research in the Institute of Criminology, actually. And we wanted essentially to license this. We think it's got tons of applications. It can be used in lots of different ways by lots of different kind of NGO partners, for example. But when we went out and started to talk to those guys, they were super interested, but licensing is just not in the vocabulary of how these guys want to work, and that's not how they want to work. And even trying to think about how we could manage financial terms around a license, it just didn't make sense. And so in that case, we're going down more like a kind of consultancy route. putting a consultancy agreement in place that will allow us to deliver this thing, reserve rights however they need to be managed, and that way the university can still manage the liabilities and warranties and things like that. And that perhaps is a first step towards a company. You know, you can see a situation where actually if this is gaining a lot of traction and we're licensing it again, sorry, if we're getting a kind of delivery agreement again and again, that there's a possibility of a company to form in the future, or a social enterprise in this case. I think it would probably be. But I think it's more practical than that. It's like, well, what kind of agreement does this need to be to make it work for you, and trying not to get too pinned down, I guess, with a license would be great because that'll give us some, you know, ref brownie points or something, but just think, okay, how are we going to kind of deliver the impact here? Yeah, but it's tricky as well, because one of the things we're trying to convince our academics of is that there is intellectual property in the work that they're producing, and actually it does need protecting, and consultancy isn't always the best way to go about that. So balancing those two things. Yeah.
Do you get, I mean, Chris, I mean, the stuff that Chris is having to deal with a lot at the moment, do you get a lot of data? You know, and I mean, particularly with social scientists generate an awful lot of data. Yeah. And how do you deal with all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think again, increasingly more of this. So we've had really interesting bits of historical data being licensed, for example. I think health data is a big kind of and difficult area of sort of social science coming out of public health. Increasingly, there are kind of publicly available data sets that our researchers are using, and then we have to really kind of mind the gap when it comes to is it even appropriate for us to think about commercialization? And then I think there are also questions from the researchers often about sort of open source routes, and whether there's some way that we can open license the work or dual license data work, for example, for commercial and non-commercial use. So we try and listen to the concerns of the academic in doing that. I think data as a service, I mean, I mentioned Versed AI earlier, and really that started as a software as a service company, and it still has a very interesting software platform, but actually they also have proprietary data, and I think that that is a whole new possibility for them. And I think that there are probably other budding companies now that have similar kind of data sets that they've built up that are going to be, that's going to be their USP. People don't just need the software, they also need the underlying data to be able to work. Yeah.
That brings me on to my question, which is you kind of alluded to the role of data and software. Do you see that as kind of the big growing trend for how commercialization in social sciences and humanities will work?
Sort of yes and no. So I kind of hope that it isn't in some ways. So I think that there is huge potential in software. This is an area that I think actually, you know, universities are already pretty good at commercializing software. We've got models for that. There are incubators, we've got investors, but we just haven't been going to the humanities. We haven't been going to the arts. And certainly we haven't been going to the social sciences and wondering if they have any kind of interesting data or, you know, so I think there's just a kind of, it's not quite an easy win, but I think there's definitely, you know, something there that can be tapped quite quickly, and that will have a huge effect, I think, as well on bringing a more kind of sustainable funding streams into those disciplines, which would be amazing. And already in computer science we know that that's happening, but perhaps we're not seeing it already. But I sort of hope in some ways that it is these that it is more of these interventions that we find really good pathways for, because I think our difficulty there tends to be that, you know, we're not working with known industry partners. You know, it's not a new material and we know who's buying new materials and we know who to ask. With these social interventions, they're niche, they don't pivot because they are directed at solving a particular problem. So, you know, there's no question that the academic or the founders are going to suddenly be like, oh, actually, it's more lucrative to go and do this other thing because our investors say so. That's just not how they're working. And so I think those things feel difficult, but there must be a way for us, I think, as a kind of community, actually, to work out how can we help our academics to deliver this in a way that makes sense, that allows the academic to kind of preserve the core research. And in terms of making an impact, commercialization tools can definitely help here. They absolutely can. So I think that's probably where we should be at least trying to apply our efforts. So I'm hopeful that that will be the next big rise. And actually social enterprise feeds into that as well, because I think some of those interventions fit a social enterprise model.
Do you think there's tension though between a software based intervention possibly versus an intervention delivered, say, in person?
No, that's true. It's a bit arbitrary. So absolutely, software can be used to deliver all kinds of social interventions, and as a kind of as a tool, as a platform. But I think when I'm talking about sort of our software companies, I think it's almost a kind of novel or a platform software really that has so many possible applications and so many different ways that it can be exploited and used. Whereas I think these social interventions, which are really narrowing in, they've built a tool to be used by a particular set of users. It's already productized in some cases as well, much more so than some of the kind of raw stuff that's coming out of a computer lab. So yeah, I hope that kind of social intervention focus, which is core to the social sciences, will start to mesh with commercialization and sort of gel a little bit better. Yeah.
And you know, that's the kind of hopeful, positive picture. What's tough about doing your job? What are the yeah,
it's quite a lot of things. I mean, I think it's in some ways it's been good. I'm glad that I have that kind of background in the humanities and social sciences, because I think that allows me to kind of get on top of what the intervention, what the idea is, what the kind of core is. And I think that's quite hard if you've got more of a kind of STEM background and maybe you're kind of coming to that research culture a little bit sort of, yeah, as an outsider or something. So that's been good, but it remains challenging. People don't really understand what commercialization is. I didn't get too much of kind of commercialization as a dirty word. I know that is an experience of other people that work in this area, but I didn't get a lot of that. It's more like, what has this got to do with us? You know, and I think that impact is actually still relatively new. We, you know, people who are working as kind of facilitators in knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, this is like kind of bread and butter. But actually, if you're a researcher working on a monograph project in the humanities, maybe these things have not really made a huge difference necessarily to the way that you're working and thinking. And certainly if you're a social scientist and you're interested in influencing policy in a certain area, it makes no difference to you whatsoever whether or not UKRI say you should be, because you've been motivated by doing that for years and years and years. And so I think commercialization sort of feels new and feels like it was built for STEM, and that's not very helpful. So that's difficult. And then I think building networks from scratch is hard. You know, Cambridge Enterprise has been going for decades. We have good relationships with lots and lots of different kinds of investors and mentors and stakeholders, but they're not necessarily the perfect match for something that's coming out of architecture or the Faculty of Asian Middle Eastern Studies, for example. So I think building those networks actively whilst also balancing trying to kind of help the academics, I think that's difficult. Yeah, I don't know if you guys find that. Same problem.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose we're sort of drifting towards a more national and sort of collaborative sort of area. And I mean, you'll have seen and been involved in Aspect. Does it help? I mean, what do you think of the approach? I mean,
yeah.
And you know, it's obviously one of these things where it's bringing lots of different universities and institutions together, trying to solve all sorts of these problems at the same time. Do you think this sort of national level approach is a good way of doing it?
I think it's sort of necessary. So I think there's a lot of good in Aspect. I think putting together a social science incubator makes so much sense for the academics to actually kind of form a cohort who've got similar challenges and similar backgrounds. That makes a lot of sense. And just case studies really early on, going into the schools and the departments and talking about commercialization. What I needed more than anything else was just a bunch of working case studies to say, look, this is how this could be relevant to you. And that's what we didn't have. And so, I mean, it makes so much sense to work collaboratively and to be able to kind of, you know, come over to you guys and say, hey, I've got something in policy. Do you have something like this? You know, can we maybe get the academics together? And people are really generous, I think, in that kind of knowledge transfer world, and happy to kind of give you a steer. So that all makes good sense. But I think I feel as if it's necessary now for large initiatives which are coming down from UKRI, from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, from the Economic and Social Research Council. I think this has to happen in order for culture change to kind of push through in the university. And it doesn't matter how much you advocate within the institution. I think for better or for worse, it is those funding streams that will call commercialization into kind of more prominence, or will sometimes can even distort actually the way that we're working as well. So I'm a little wary, but also I think it's probably it's time, and it's helpful to hear from the research councils. It's helpful to like that they legitimize what we're doing as well. I think that there perhaps was a bit of a sense that entrepreneurship in the humanities and social sciences was something that you maybe shouldn't really be engaging in, that it wasn't kind of core, whereas in STEM it's always been core. It's, you know, this is how you get your invention out. And so hearing from the research councils, yeah, we've got money set aside for this, this is a priority for us. I'm hopeful that will make a real difference within the university kind of culture and structure. Yeah,
I think I just add to Emma's point there on the case studies. It's also giving the case studies back to policymakers and the research councils, because it's not, you know, there's a long history of humanities and social science saying fund us, we're important.
Yeah.
And they're saying, yeah, okay, but science has just given us this, you know, £1 billion startup. That's exactly what the government gave us money for.
Yeah.
It's important that social science and humanities say, give us money and this is what you'll get. Here are 10 case studies of fantastic interventions. They may not be big money makers, but they really show how your research funding helped solve this problem in society or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I absolutely think that's right, and that the case studies, they really need to be out there. We need to do quite a bit of better job at kind of banging our own drums, and getting our academics to talk about their experience of commercialization is so powerful as well. I think there's a little bit of a danger, and I'm like slightly wary around kind of sort of impact measurement, for example. It's such a new field. It's very, very hard to measure impact. It's very easy to go to kind of quantifying, and that can be, you know, to the detriment of a fantastic kind of deep impact project that's maybe making a difference to a very small community versus one that's reached millions of people or something. So that's a kind of difficult balance, but I'm also kind of reassured by the latest developments that, you know, the UKRI understand that essentially, and the government understand that the value of the humanities especially is not going to be measured in pound signs. So yeah, and I think we have to hold on to the idea that commercialization is a pathway to impact. Commercialization isn't a way of making money. It's a set of tools really that you can use, just as you can use public engagement and policy engagement tools to create impact from your research.
You have the genie of social science and humanities commercialization, which is a well-known genie, and
one of the best genies.
This is the most in-demand genie, and this genie is going to grant you 3 wishes. So Emma, what are your 3 wishes?
Yeah, okay, so I think that I will I think first of all I might wish for some better kind of international partnerships. So like, okay, this intervention is all about the global south, and yet here we are all in Cambridge talking about how we could do it and maybe get like a funder from London. This doesn't really make sense, but that's like feels like a really big bridge. So some kind of guidance or help, and definitely some funding there. I wish for the incubator to your incubator, Chris, to flourish and do brilliantly and get to the point where it has capacity for all of the things that I think, oh yeah, this is going to make such a great company, but I don't have time to handhold at this moment. So I think that's my second wish. And then I think within Cambridge, I think it would be it's a wish, but it's also a thing that we're kind of doing, I guess. Like, I think that I really need to work more closely with the public engagement team and really understand what it is that they're doing, because they are experts in making things that interest people and that people want, and talking to the public and disseminating research in really super innovative ways. And I think there is a very valuable relationship there that if we can build on that, I think that's going to make a huge difference in terms of how we work with our academics, what kind of projects come through, and yeah, just using their expertise and their experience as well. So that's a wish, but I hope it's also a wish that can come true.
Well, thanks so much, Emma, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I've certainly learned an awful lot. So Chris and I are going to take a break now. Chris has got some holiday coming up, well-deserved holiday in my opinion as well. I don't. I've used all my holiday up, but I also got other things I need to do. So I hope you enjoyed the Christmas special. We're going to put all of these onto the various podcast platforms over the course of the next few weeks, and who knows, we might come back with something else towards the end of the autumn, or we might not, but if not, glad you could join us, and I hope you've learned something along the way. Bye for now.